actually, let me get this microphone in a good spot. There we go. So this is actually a perfect place to start, which is with this video. I uploaded this video in mid-August of last year, almost 6 months ago to the day my entire life changed. I'm not talking about the exposure that it afforded me, which is why I'm here. I'm talking about my actual being. My life as a black woman was instantly transformed. And transformed isn't even really the right word, because a transformation implies that there was some metamorphosis or change within me. A more accurate word would be rescinded. My life as a black woman was instantly rescinded. It's actually really curious if you think about it. I had spent 27 years allowed to live as I am, and yet a 2-minute satirical stab at the truth, which is that being conservative today is like being gay in the 80s. It was all it took for people to begin undressing my blackness. In the comment section, I was labeled a coon, I was called an Uncle Tom, I was called a house Negro, I was called a race traitor, I was referred to as a bed wench, which if I'm being completely honest, I had no idea what that was. I thought it sounded super comfortable. And then I found out that it turns out that a bed wench is the slave that sleeps with the master, so that's pretty abhorrent. Next up came the media hits. I had Salon.com, which is everybody's favorite leftist website, write an article about me entitled, "Meet Candace Owens, the Toxic Right's Newest African-American Star." Of course, the writer of the article never even attempted to contact me because life hack, you do not need any facts to write a hit piece. And it was laced with severe inaccuracies. For example, it said that I urge black people to vote Republican, which I have never done in my entire life, nor have I ever said in any of my videos. In fact, I am not a registered Republican. Next came an article that was entitled, "A Black Tommy Lahren?" Good one. And my personal favorite article was entitled, "What is the True Race and Ethnicity of Candace Owens?" This was an investigative piece where someone took the time to stalk each and every one of my maybe family members on Facebook and come to wild conclusions about our ancestry. For example, they discovered that there was someone who could be my aunt who was wearing a hat that had a Puerto Rican flag stitched onto it. Therefore, it was fair to speculate that I might be Puerto Rican, which is news to me. They found my grandmother's obituary and determined quite accurately that she was from the Virgin Islands. Therefore, it was fair to them to speculate that I did not descend from American slavery. Therefore, I could not stake my claim to true American blackness. These petty little earthquakes that ensued after I posted that video helped me to understand one thing, that being black is apparently fickle. It's apparently a membership to a club where one must abide strictly by a set of ideological rules or else be ejected swiftly without any chance for any redemption. And that is an amazing phenomenon. Because if the left's thesis is that blackness is best demonstrated by conditions of struggle, I can't imagine a better poster child for that than me. Here are some things about me and my personal life that you will definitively not find on the internet. The earliest memories of my childhood were living in an apartment with my 2 sisters and I squished into a shared bedroom in a low-income building. Every few months or so, we'd have to remove all the pots and pans out of our tiny little kitchen and put that in plastic bags so that the exterminator could come spray and kill some of the roaches that live with us. My mother did her best to keep the apartment clean, but in these sorts of building developments, you really are who your neighbors are. Speaking of my mother, she did not graduate high school. She spent her childhood in and out of group homes as one of 9 children, and she became pregnant with her first child, my brother, at 17 years old. Despite her academic failures, my mother was naturally a bright young woman, and I can't say for certain, but I think she would perhaps contribute that to her knack for reading. My mother loved books. Novels became her mental escape from poverty growing up. This is perhaps why, despite the fact that we lived in a roach-infested apartment, my mother would march us to the local library every weekend to pick out books to read. And that is exactly when I inherited my love for books. I was the fastest reader at the library. They would measure the amount of books we read with these paper caterpillars, and they would extend the length. And my caterpillar was wrapped around the entire children's room twice. I was reading well ahead of my peers and ahead of my sisters. At the age of 9, my grandparents, who lived in a middle-class neighborhood in Connecticut, made the decision that they didn't want their grandchildren to grow up in the conditions of our building, so they moved our family of 6 into their home. Retrospectively, this afforded me my very first break in life. We were at max capacity in their home, so much so that my parents lived in the basement and my sister and I lived in the attic. And yet I refer to this as my first break in life because I began to live under my grandfather's rules. My grandfather was extremely strict. He believed very much in structure and hard work. That's because he held his first job when he was just 5 years old. He was born onto a sharecropping farm in North Carolina, and his first job was to wake up before the sunrise to lay tobacco out to dry in an attic. He would tell us stories about the KKK arriving on horseback at night and shooting into his home because they took issue with his father. They would also burn crosses on his lawn. My grandfather made sure that we had a very real understanding of our history, so you'll have to forgive me for not buying into the left's narrative that Trump is a racist, and that America is somehow more racist today than it was back then. Every morning my grandfather would make us read passages out of the Bible while he would fix us a big Southern breakfast. He and my grandmother were extremely, extremely religious. They married at the age of 17. They remained married until her dying day 5 years ago. What's interesting is that having grown up during the civil rights era, my grandfather is what I think we would all refer to today as a classical liberal. It shocks him today when I speak to him and I tell him that all of these values that he instilled in us growing up, hard work, religion, marriage, and family, are laughed at by liberals today. They're conservative positions to hold. You have to imagine how interesting that is to him to hear, and you have to imagine how interesting it is to me, which I've grown up in a household with a man that was attacked regularly by the KKK. How odd it is to read stories questioning whether my family is even black, all because I said, Mom, Dad, I'm a conservative. The most curious thing to me is that there's an underlying paradox in all of this. The message that I preach is simply that I believe in black people. I believe black people can do it without handouts. My entire life has taught me that even with economic or educational odds stacked against you, you can make it. My grandfather started on a sharecropping farm in the South, and today he is retired. He and my grandmother went back and purchased that sharecropping farm in North Carolina, and they built their house upon it. It's actually because of my roots I'm incapable of looking at my existence as a black person as a handicap. I also don't look at my anatomy, my womanhood, as a hurdle. Perhaps if I was living in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia, my position might be a little different, but I live in America, which is the most diverse country in the entire world, and it's the greatest country in the entire world because there is no other country where there's more economic opportunity for people of all different colors and creeds, and that is an indisputable fact. The paradox today is that if you believe in black people, you somehow betray them. Simply stated, confidence is considered anti-black. It's a controversial attribute to possess. This is, of course, all due to the philosophical sleight of hand the Democrats have played through their near dominance of our academia, our media, and most importantly, our culture in Hollywood. They've effectively brainwashed entire groups of people into supporting ideas that are ultimately harmful to themselves. I feel that the black allegiance to the Democratic Party is proof of that. You know, the first time that I was accused of betraying my race, I was 10 years old. I was in 5th grade, and I got a lot of the answers correct on a standardized test. Prior to standardized testing, our classes were largely mixed, meaning that students from all over the intellectual spectrum were in every class. Incidentally, my best friends were Christina, a Spanish girl, and Alex, a black girl. They were my best friends because they were in all of my classes. You make friends with whoever you're exposed to. It's really not that complicated. But after standardized testing and as an intro into middle school, I hardly ever saw those two girls ever again. My new best friends were all white. That's because they were in all of my classes. You make friends with whoever you're exposed to. It's really not that complicated. On a go-forward basis, there would be just one black girl in my class and just one black guy in my class, and I was friends with both of them. And yet somehow I was accused of acting white. And that's about the time that all of the bullying started. I had this one girl, who I will never forget, her name was Tiana, and every single time I would pass her in the hallway, she would come up to me and she would bump my shoulder. She was really bony and I was really bony, so it kind of hurt. And she could literally be anywhere. She could be 14 degrees due west of the cafeteria. I could be 18 degrees due east of the library. She would come find my shoulder and she would bump it. There would be no exchange, just the ram, which was just to let me know that she didn't like me. She didn't approve of me. Then there was Janelle. Janelle was a giant. She was a very tall black girl. And every time I would walk down her classroom hallway, she would jump in front of me and absolutely humiliate me with some comment about how I looked. I remember one day I had worked up the courage in my mind, and I was like, when Janae stops me today, I'm going to say something back to her. And I was wearing these white Old Navy pants and a blue short sleeve shirt. And Janae pivoted in front of me and she says, don't you know you're not supposed to wear white after Labor Day? Actually, I had no idea. And I said to her, I can wear whatever I want. And I felt so good about that. And I scurried off quickly, hoping that she wouldn't punch me in the face. And she didn't punch me in the face, so it was actually a really good day for me. Then there was Sheena, who delivered to me what I will always remember as the most embarrassing day. I shouldn't even say middle school career, the most embarrassing, awful day of my entire educational career. Sheena was this freakishly beautiful black girl who all the guys liked, who was in none of my classes for the same reasons, and who I only saw at lunchtime because she sat diagonally from me at a table. If you think of middle school really like the movie Mean Girls, then Sheena's lunch table would be described as the group of really popular black girls. One day Sheena calls me over, and we had never had any correspondence whatsoever. I'm eating a slice of pizza, and I walk over to her table and I say hi. And she says, can I ask you a question? It's really important to break here and tell you guys that during this phase of my life, I was racing home to read Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling was slowly releasing each and every installment of her novel, and my mother and I used to compete to see who could read it faster. I was deeply involved in the culture of wizardry, and pretty much nothing else. So I head over to Sheena's table, and I say, yes, Sheena, of course, you can ask me a question. And she asks me, if I was to say to you, holla, what would you say back? This was not a Harry Potter question. So I answered back with the first thing that popped into my mind, and I said, I would say hello. Wrong answer. The entire table erupted into laughter. The correct answer, for those of you who may have also been swept into the magical adventures of Harry Potter, was Holla Back, Youngin'. It was the most popular hip-hop song on the airways at the time by rapper Fabulous. Mortified, I went home and I learned every single lyric of that song. I felt somehow that I had failed, and I will say that since that day, I have made a conscious effort to always be up to date on the most popular hip-hop songs. These are the scars of my childhood. I don't bring up these girls because they're my enemies. I bring up these girls because they're actually not. Shoulder bumping Tiana and I would 2 years later wind up in an elective course together, sewing, and after about 2 weeks of awkward tension, we broke conversation and we became friends. It turns out we had a lot more in common than she initially thought, and she said to me one day, I didn't like you because I just thought you were trying to be white. And I said, no, Tiana, I just make friends with whoever is in my classes. It's not that complicated. Once Tiana found out that I was cool, she mentioned it to Holla Back Sheena, who struck up a casual conversation with me in music class, and who a few weeks later said, Candace, you sound mad white, but you're cool. Thumbs up, that was awesome to hear from Sheena. Last in line was Labor Day Janae, who after some standardized testing would end up in my freshman year high school math class. I was really terrible at math, and she and I would help each other try to pass the class, and she became not just friendly towards me, but someone that I would consider to be a good friend, even until this day. She would actually defend me when a new herd of high school black girls tried the exact same bullying tactics. In that regard, high school wound up being a hell of a lot easier than middle school ever was. The interesting part here is not that I got shoulder bumped a few times walking down the hallway. The interesting part is the reason why. The interesting part is that at the young age of 11 years old, these 3 young black girls already had an idea of what it meant to be black, and they each understood that I had somehow betrayed that definition. I had betrayed blackness by performing well on tests. I had betrayed blackness by speaking proper English. I had betrayed blackness by choosing novels and books over hip-hop music. At the young age of 11 years old, these 3 girls had already accepted a thesis that education betrays blackness. It's no wonder that 16 years later, declaring myself a conservative has somehow caused the exact same visceral rejection amongst my racial peers. Thomas Sowell, Dr. Ben Carson, Condoleezza Rice, Herman Cain, Larry Elder. These are some of the most educated black men and women in the political spectrum. They are conservative and they are rejected by their racial peers. These people, all alive today, have broken barriers and should be celebrated. They are living, breathing proof that no matter what your race or sex is, education is the ticket to success. Who taught black people to reject education? That is the question I ask myself all the time. Who taught black people that the only acceptable means of success are sports, hip-hop music, and of course, lending your black voice to lead other blacks toward further destruction, like Al Sharpton or the Black Lives Matter group. Do you know the odds of a man making it to the NBA, no matter what the color of his skin is? Only 2.3% of high school basketball players will play in the NCAA. Of those 2.3%, only 1% will be drafted to the NBA. These are the dreams that black people are conditioned to chase. Of course, what we are scratching at the surface of here is identity politics. The left's hitherto successful attempt to get people to abandon their individualism in favor of a collectivist mentality. So to them, I am not Candace Owens, who happens to be black. I am a black woman first, who happens to go by the name Candace Owens. The individual does not exist on the left. It's cultural Marxism pontificated. How is it defeated? I will leave you with this, which I read an amazing piece by Herman Cain entitled, House Negroes Stand Up. He says, quote, "The good news is that millions of black people are not drinking the name-calling brand of Kool-Aid. We are thinking for ourselves, telling people the truth, serving our country, and pursuing the greatness of America and the richness of our futures. Being called a house Negro is just one of the insulting names I have been called as an American black conservative, simply because I do not subscribe to black liberal, backward-looking narrative of black identity politics. If being called a house Negro is what some of us must endure for succeeding in this nation and thinking for ourselves, then let all the house Negroes stand up and be counted," end quote. I can't think of a more beautiful way to put that than the words of his statement. The politics of identity will only be defeated by an ideological revolution, with people like me standing up unabashedly against assaults on our character. Being called Tommy Lahren, a coon, house Negro, or having my ancestry called into question seems like an extraordinarily small price to pay for my freedom. Thank you, guys.